Okay, so today we have Rachel Fuller joining us from WVU. Thanks for joining us today. We're putting this series together in an effort to, provide information to the community and individuals interested to just offer education and insight into what you do, and the stigma that sometimes surrounds that. So to get us started, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to be interested in behavioral health and your current field of study?
Yeah, so my name's Rachel, and I'm actually originally from Utah. So my mother went back to school to get her bachelor's in social work when I was in middle school. So I watched her get her bachelor's degree and then go on to get her master's in social work when I was in high school. And so I watched her become a therapist. And that's where my interest kind of peaked. So when I started college, I was choosing between social work and marine biology, which seem very different, but in my mind, I was either saving the fish or saving people. So that's how they related to me. And I took intro classes into both and loved both of them, but social work just came really naturally to me. I have a natural affinity for emotions. I've been called overly emotional and dramatic most of my childhood and growing up. So it just came really easily to me. So I chose social work and I got my bachelor's of social work in Utah at the University of Utah. And in the University of Utah, they offer an additional program where I also received an advanced substance use disorder counseling certificate there. So for 2 years after I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I was a substance use disorder counselor at a methadone clinic. And I worked specifically with heroin users receiving methadone. And then I moved here to West Virginia following my husband who got into physical therapy school and worked for a year with children as a safe at home facilitator. So I was working with kids and their families who had an open DHHR case for a number of reasons. And I just wasn't able to make the kind of change that I was hoping to make at that level. So I decided to return to school and get my master's degree, which is what I'm finishing up right now. So that's about how I got interested in the profession.
Wow. Yeah, Safe at Home. That's a great service. I'm aware of some of the things that they do. That's great. So, well, welcome. We'd love to have you here in West Virginia. We're glad you chose the people over the fish. Um, so I'm sure maybe you've experienced or heard or seen, but sometimes there's a stigma that surrounds the field of behavioral health and even the profession in behavioral health. So what's your response to that and why, and what do you have to say or experience from that?
Absolutely. So there's a number of different stigma I've experienced going into this field. And so I'll talk about kind of the different stigmas I received. So the first, I think, would be the money aspect. When I tell people I'm a social worker or that I went into social work, one of the biggest things I hear is like, bless you, but also like, how do you live? Like, because I make no money or I didn't make a lot of money as a bachelor's level at least. And my first few years going into my master's degree, I won't either. And so it's a lot of explanation as to, well, you go into this not for the money, but to help people. Um, but there's a big stigma around even asking for more money. And we talk a lot about this in school and looking at nonprofits who are trying to raise their overhead costs. We judge them for wanting to pay their people a little bit more money or their CEOs making, 100 grand a year because we think that they should be working for nothing. And so I think that's one of the biggest stigmas I've experienced is people realize I make no money, but when I try to ask for more money or I try to advocate for myself and say I'm a professional and I deserve to make a living wage, you get judged for that. And then another big stigma I've experienced is going into the ASUDSI program in Utah. Opiate addiction was a big problem in Utah, and it was a bigger problem when I moved here. I didn't know that when I chose West Virginia to come to I was moving to like the top state in the United States. And I would hear from a lot of my friends, like, I understand why you might pick up a joint one day, but I just don't understand why you would ever try heroin or what would ever make you pick up crack cocaine. And I didn't understand that at first. But the biggest way to get around that stigma is education and is talking to those people. Because if you grew up watching your parents do heroin and they let you try heroin at age 7, it doesn't seem as odd as it does to us who never grew up with that. Or if you've had extreme trauma in your life, where every day is a chore to live through, picking up heroin doesn't seem as extreme as it does to somebody who's happy with their life or who has had more privilege. So pure education and choosing to take a class in college where you might hear from somebody who will explain to you why they chose to do those things does get through a lot of that stigma. And then the last piece of stigma I've experienced or heard about is just in mental health. Um, I've heard a lot about it recently with a lot of the mass shootings that are starting to happen again. A lot of people talk about that they're mentally ill, and then a lot of people talk about that we shouldn't talk about that they're mentally ill because that adds to the stigma around mental illness. But it really shouldn't, because when you think about somebody with a bladder infection, you don't think about somebody on dialysis, or that picture doesn't come to your mind of somebody hooked up to a dialysis machine. So why, when we say the word mental illness, do you think of the worst of mental illness? There's a whole spectrum here of mental illness. There's people with totally treatable anxiety who just need a little bit of help, and then there's people who really need to be institutionalized and who need a lot more help to get better. And so the fact that when we think about mental illness, we think about the worst schizophrenia that needs a lot of help to get better and to be managed is a problem in of itself. So in my opinion, pure education is how we get past all of this. Stigma comes from, I think, just not talking about it and being uncomfy and being unwilling to ask people their experiences and talk about it and look beyond what you believe.
Yeah, that you put that so nicely and just so easy to understand. So I really like how you put that. And I did want to ask you, becoming a behavioral health professional, which you have been at the bachelor's level and now will be at the master's level, I would be curious to know how you would plan to, address and deal with the stigma and the barriers and everything that you spoke of. And you did mention it already that, the most important thing is really education and just offering that to people, versus maybe trying to just have an argument. Having the knowledge of something is a lot better way to get a point across, and so is there anything else though that you would plan to do as you enter into the field or re-enter into the field that would, address those barriers and stigma?
Yeah, so this can be a little controversial in the field, but I actually plan on doing a lot of stuff on social media. So I plan on purely educational stuff, not offering therapy through social media, but on talking a lot about mental health, a lot about substance abuse, and a lot about stigma on social media. Talking about when I have bad days, talking about lessons that I learned from my clients, not about their information specifically,
Mhm.
but just about themes that I see in the clients, because I'm planning on doing just therapy. So themes that I see, lessons that I learn, stuff that comes up over and over, I just plan on talking about it, posting about it, and just educating the public for free through social media, because I think people are already accessing social media all day, every day, especially younger generations. And so I think social media is a really easy and accessible way to offer that education.
Wow, yeah, that is, and I can see what you mean about it maybe being controversial, but for a lot of people, social media is their news source and it's where they go for information. Now, is it always correct? Not necessarily, but the fact that you're taking that initiative to put out information that is true and factual and offer that in that way, that's really interesting. So I love that. So, it sounds like you have some plans going forward, but as it relates to your professional position, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
So in 5 years, I'll be back in my home state of Utah, most likely. And I plan on having my own practice, most likely with my mom. I talked about her being a therapist. I'm trying to get her to go into private practice with me. But I plan on being set up to take most insurances. I don't just want to take private pay. I really want to work with being able to see people kind of all over the map and offering kind of sliding scale fees because I know therapy isn't accessible to everybody. And so I want to be able to do that. And then I plan on also having a social media presence where I can access people through education as well.
Great. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. We are so glad that you took the time to talk with us today. Good luck in your endeavors, and thanks again.
Thank you so much.